everyone, welcome to MJ Hobby Corner. I'm Martin, and I'll be your host in this video. And in these videos, we explore all the building I've done in these past 4 years. We'll look at some projects of the past. We'll go back in time and also look at projects of the future and how these projects are affected by all the stuff I've learned throughout the channel. So today we're going to look at a very important piece of terrain in my collection, my sci-fi walls. Now these are the oldest of my sci-fi walls. They are double-sided. Many of these also have opening doors, opening slide doors. We'll talk a bit about the construction of these walls, and I'll show you some examples out there. In the primary studio, we'll go visit my big workbench. We can look at the walls in other angles, and I'll talk to you about some future projects. Now the table back here is set up with these sci-fi walls. I have about 10 different pieces. They're all modular, and this is a sci-fi complex for 5 Parsecs from Home, which is filming this weekend for my patrons. So we'll talk a little bit about the uses that these walls have in all of my games. Now we're here in my smaller studio. This is my filming studio for the winter, so I'm getting everything ready for the winter for filming games in here. So most of my winter games are going to be very small because, of course, the primary studio, I have no heating in there, and so it closes down for the winter and reopens in the spring. So I have a lot of plans for next year for the primary studio, so we'll see what happens. Now, if you want to help support the channel or support the work that I do, anything that I do here, this is very low budget. You can go hop on Wargames Vault and check out scratchbuilder monthly. All of the projects I will be talking about, that's where they end up in my magazine. And I have tons and tons of photos in the magazine showing how I build everything and discussing some of my ideas, within the different articles. Okay, and I'm trying to add more and more material to the magazine to make it a little bit more interesting to crafters and gamers alike. So, all right, with that said, let's go and continue to look at this a little bit closer. So here we are in the primary studio. Give a little change of scenery. It's a little chilly, but not too bad. I can still work in here. I'll be filming Death Wizards later on a table across the way there. So let's talk a little bit about wall construction, how this project was constructed. Now remember, this is talking about the original walls 4 years ago. Future projects with this theme in mind are going to use different techniques, and I'll probably be experimenting with different materials. More on that in a little bit. So let's look at what's going on with the walls. Okay, so this is an example of how these walls begin. Now I have a couple of examples here, smaller examples, and as you can see, these smaller sections are pretty thick. Okay, here are some rubber magnets, button magnets from Walmart. We have the straws for the piping, and I used a lot of old sprues from miniatures. After assembling my miniatures, these old sprues become a lot of detail. Okay, but we also have some bits from vehicles and such that I never used, bits from Titanicus and the like. So the first thing I did was essentially to build rectangular sections of wall. This would be an example of a larger wall. It's 2 pieces of corrugated cardboard, and I straighten it as best as possible. And then I essentially make a rectangle with the cardboard. This becomes my armature. So basically the skeleton of each wall section. Now here I would measure this out and make a nice little rectangular piece of cardboard, and the primary adhesive that I use during this time, and probably in future builds as well, is hot glue. Now I do have a little bit of a super glue in areas, and a little bit of a mix of super glue and white tacky glue, which makes a nice little adhesive. And that is for certain little bits where I don't want to use the hot glue, but most of it is put together with hot glue. That's it. Now, to make my doors, and now if this one has an opening doorway, some of them have uh, open doorways without sliding doors. Either way, I always use the miniature of the scale that I want the walls to be in. So, in essence, this is going to be for 28 millimeter or even a little bit bigger miniature scale. So, I use my 28 millimeter figure, putting the base as you see here at the bottom edge of the cardboard in order to get a sense of how large my doorways are going to be. The doorways are critical for the scale component, but it definitely has a base down there, so that makes up for some of the base height of the miniature. This one actually used craft stick wood. These are the largest craft sticks that you can get, and I actually made the bases out of that, and it makes very strong wood frames, basically. So here's my cut doorway, and then I use my marker, angle my marker so that I get as close as possible to the edges of the doorway here, and then I cut out my other doorway. Now, very important is that all of this is very rough, so I need my filing paper, and I file everything, get it straighter, and I also file my doorways here in order to get things a little bit straighter. In more extreme cases, I took my Dremel with a filing bit and just filed the edges with the Dremel, and that helps a lot. But you have to do it very carefully so you don't chew out your cardboard too much. Now, I work in layers or steps. Basically, this is my first step. If I want this to have an open doorway or a sliding doorway, this is the first step. And once this is complete, then I begin to add the plastic layer, which is this here. Now notice how these pieces, these came from plastic bottles that were juice bottles. It was actually like grape juice, if I remember correctly. And I collected several of those bottles and cut them out with a heavy scissor. And basically that's what I used. Here is the edge of the bottle. It kind of rounds out nicely. And so they became good edge decoration for the walls. And I did this for all of the walls. You will see various plastic materials there that add decoration to the walls. Okay, so let's look at a cross section of a sci-fi wall with an opening doorway. Okay, now the concept is very simple. These days I'm using a slightly different method for creating opening doors, but this is how it was when I actually built this project. Here is the other section of wall, and I purposely cut it because on this top section I actually add other decorations, and so you have this going on. But here is the cross section. All I did was basically measured out a few pieces of stick, decided how the doorway was going to go. The door has to be short enough that when you open it, it reveals the entire doorway. So you have to just measure and make sure that your sizes are correct. Now, I don't even have to make it this long. It could be shorter, and as long as the doorway is revealed, we're good, right? But basically, I found when I was constructing these that adding a little length to the door actually made it more stable when you push back and forth. Again, as long as you have a track that works to guide everything, and you want to make sure that everything is filed and nice and straight so nothing is catching. Now, it's not perfect, but it works very well. Now here, usually I would add a flat piece, and then as you see in this older doorway, there's a little knob there out of stick, and it's flexible. That helps me grip it, and then I can kind of open it and close it, and it seals the doorway there. So that's essentially what's missing here is the little knob. So the important thing are these edges here, the framing of the wall of the door, which strengthens the door. So again, this was all learned through trial and error, but basically the door has to be the same thickness, has to be flush with the thickness of the rest of the corrugated card and the sticks. So as flush as possible, if you see what I mean. So this part here has to be flush, the same thickness as your door. Okay, so when you put the other half together, you get this sandwiched layer, right? And then all you need is your little knob so your door can open. Now, once all this is glued, being careful not to glue your tracks, then these things serve as tracks and you can open your door. Now, very important is that everything has to be mounted on a base and secured on a base so that you can then open the door. Now, future builds are not going to have this part here. Okay, this was an important part of the original build because it secures everything, but I think I figured out another way to have this open. This way figures can go through, but the door will have to be, there'll have to be a tiny, tiny little elevation on the doorway there, and everything will have to be secured a little bit differently so that that can occur. But basically, these are the components. So you're going to need your track. You're going to need your wall thickness here to match with the other side of the wall. And then you need a base that's going to hold everything together. And finally, a little knob. Now, these were the sort of, this was the original kind of idea that I had. Unfortunately, this doesn't work very well. So I abandoned that idea and I put the little knobby end right at the tip of the door so that when I opened it and closed it, it's sealed properly with this side here. One of the things that I created after this technique, after I made these walls, about a year after, I began to make starships using the same exact technique that I just demonstrated. All of this like structural detail. And I made starships. And in the future, I will be making larger starship tiles and starship terrain using the exact same technique. And here is an example of a sci-fi truck made with the exact same techniques that I used for the sci-fi walls. So one thing leads into another. Basically, it's a technique that can be used in many different ways to make very low budget stuff. So this was just meant to give an idea on how these structures are made. But here is like a very like complex generator type thing, or it could be an engine to a starship. That's what I use this kind of stuff for when I was making my starship tiles. These are the terrain pieces that decorated all the interior of the starship, and it works really well in that respect. Now this one, I want to redo the frame here. We'll see. But all this is the main tube here for this engine was a paper towel roll tube, and then connected to the ends are plastic bottles, and then just a whole bunch of decorations like straws and you know, bottle caps and just anything I can throw in there. Well, the primary tools back then were my cutters. These were basically crucial. And then I had scissors. Also my X-Acto blade. I used the X-Acto blade for many things. File paper or a filing block, and my Dremel. Those were very important tools. And also hot glue is the main adhesive. And of course rulers and measuring materials are always very useful. But basically this is it. This is all I really used. I even created my own engine parts to depict areas inside a starship. For example, an engine room. Here are the nozzles of that room. And then all of this material, this would actually go like this on my Starship tile. And then this is, all of the components of the engine, which is back here. And it's basically just a terrain piece to help create the environments. Now, this is all done with the same exact technique that I used in the beginning to make those sci-fi walls. So that's the point, is that original project, it just created a whole bunch of different things in the future. About 2 years after the construction of this sci-fi complex, I actually felt the need for additional kinds of walls built very differently, uh, exclusively with cardboard this time, and cardboard corrugation to make the walls themselves. And I made about 6 or 8 of these pieces, and these were detailed in one of my Scratch Builder monthlies, one of my earliest Scratch Builders, about 3 years ago, 2 years ago, roughly. And these also have open doorways. Some of them do have doors that open and close, but it's a very thin cardboard construction. And again, all the detail is mostly cardboard. So these are a lot cheaper, less time consuming, and it gave me another way of recreating sci-fi environments, indoor sci-fi environments. Now, these walls are not yet painted. They do have a coat of primer, but I do need to paint some details on these. And again, these help in creating certain areas that are not as like industrial like as the original walls are. So it gives me a different perspective. One of your most important tools, two things: your hands and your imagination. Those are really the most important tools you have. So after they were built, these walls, sci-fi walls, have led to a multitude of different game setups. Sometimes I mixed it with other terrain that I built specifically to fit with the walls, with the theme of the walls. And other times I use lighting effects, like RGB lighting effects from my ring light, in order to set a specific mood for the theme I was playing. So the walls, it's really interesting how one project can lead you to a whole variety of different uses for the same terrain. This way, saving time and also saving space, because I don't have to build a gazillion different things just to fit a variety of themes. I can use the terrain that I already have existing and just use it in different ways. And that's how the sci-fi walls, have become the most important and most used terrain of my collection. As I said, I've used it as the exterior of buildings by adding a roof with existing terrain. I've used it in various kinds of like starship interiors and the interiors of certain sci-fi buildings. It's really been a useful project, and I'm glad that I actually invested that week years ago and made these walls. Channel, all this stuff, all the new projects will be in Scratch Builder Monthly. I am currently working on November issue. I just put October issue out. They usually come out the first of the month, and it details the projects that occur in the previous month. So that's the way Scratch Builder works. You can see them on War Games Vault, or if you become a patron, you get them as part of the Patreon subscription. You get the magazine as well. All right. So I will continue to announce new projects. We're going to have smaller scaled sci-fi walls for 15 millimeter. I have a whole new technique that I'm working on, but we'll see how it works. It's going to be a big experiment, and it uses some materials that you may not have thought of. We'll see. We'll talk about that in the future and see how it all works. All right, again, for 15 millimeter sci-fi gaming, or even smaller, I think. We'll see. All right, folks, we'll talk in the next video. Thank you so much for your support. I'm MJ from MJ Hobby Corner, and I'll see you in the next video.